Picture this. You are running. Not for sport, not for leisure, but for your very life. The world you knew, a glittering cage of marble floors and hollow laughter, has just collapsed, and its gilded bars are now the jaws of a trap. Your husband, a man who built an empire of steel and secrets, is gone. And in his wake, you have inherited two things: a fortune beyond measure, and a list of enemies who believe that fortune is theirs. Tonight, they are coming to collect. The engine of your luxury sedan, a machine built for city streets, has choked on a muddy back road, its dying gasp a final metallic sigh. Rain, cold and merciless, lashes down from a bruised purple sky, turning the earth to soup beneath your thin, inappropriate shoes. Every shadow seems to hold a predator. Every gust of wind sounds like your name being whispered by a phantom. You have one bag, filled with cash and documents that feel as useless as paper shields against wolves. And then, through the deluge, you see it. A single, defiant point of light. A lamp in a window. A beacon of impossible warmth in the cold, hostile wilderness. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar feeling, pulls you forward. You stumble toward it, your breath coming in ragged clouds, your heart a frantic drum against your ribs. The light belongs to a small, sturdy cabin, smoke curling from its stone chimney like a prayer. You pound on the solid wood of the door, your knuckles raw, your voice a desperate plea swallowed by the storm. The door swings inward. A man fills the frame, a silhouette against the firelight within. He is tall, broad-shouldered, and his face is a roadmap of a hard-lived life, etched with lines of sun and sorrow. A pale scar, a sliver of moonlight, runs from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, giving his expression a permanent severity. He says nothing. He simply looks at you, his eyes the color of a winter sky, taking in your drenched, shivering form, your terror-widened eyes. He steps aside, a silent invitation into the sanctuary of his home. You spill inside, bringing the storm with you. And in that moment of desperation, you look at this stranger, this mountain of a man, and you make the only offer you can think of. An offer of land, of wealth. You offer him a kingdom for a single night of safety. This is where our story begins. Her name was Alara Vance. For 10 years, she had been the wife of Richard Vance, a titan of industry whose shadow was long enough to blot out the sun. Now she was his widow. The cabin was small, but the warmth from the stone hearth was immense, a living thing that seemed to push back the ravenous dark. The man, who had yet to offer his name, moved with a quiet economy. He handed her a thick wool blanket and gestured to a worn armchair by the fire. He moved to the stove, his back to her, and began preparing something in a small pot. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside, a mournful beast trying to claw its way in. Alara clutched the blanket around her, the rough wool a comforting anchor in the dizzying sea of her fear. She watched him, this silent protector. He was not a man of her world. His hands were calloused, his clothes simple and functional. There was a stillness about him, a rootedness, as if he were part of the very landscape he inhabited. Finally, she found her voice, though it was thin and reedy. "They're coming for me," she said, the words tasting like ash. "My husband's business partner, Marcus Thorne. He thinks everything Richard owned now belongs to him, including me." The man turned, a steaming mug in each hand. He handed one to her. The raw, earthy scent of chamomile and honey rose to meet her. His eyes held hers for a moment, and in their depths, she saw not pity, but a profound and weary understanding. "Men like that," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "believe the world is a thing to be owned." He sat in the chair opposite her, the firelight carving deep shadows into the rugged terrain of his face. He held his mug in both hands, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "What is it you want from me?" he asked, his tone not unkind, but direct, stripped of all pleasantry. Alara took a shaky breath. She had rehearsed this in her mind, the wild, desperate gambit. She reached into her sodden bag and pulled out a leather folio, protecting it from the drips falling from her hair. She laid it on the small wooden table between them. "The North Ridge," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. 500 acres of untouched timber and riverfront property. It was Richard's private retreat. It's worth millions. The deed is in there, clean and clear. It's yours. All I ask is that you keep me safe until dawn." Just one night she watched his face, expecting to see a flicker of greed, a spark of calculation. It was the language her husband had spoken, the currency of his world. Everything and everyone had a price. But the man's expression did not change. He did not even glance at the folio. His gaze remained on the fire, as if her offer were of no more consequence than a falling ember. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The storm raged, the fire popped, and Alara's hope began to wither. He finally turned his head, his winter sky eyes pinning her in place. "I don't want your land," he said, and the quiet certainty in his voice struck her with more force than a physical blow. She stared at him, bewildered. She had offered him a fortune, a life-changing sum that would make him a king in these parts. For a man living in a simple cabin, it should have been irresistible. "But why?" she stammered. "You don't understand. These men are dangerous. They won't just ask me to leave." He took a slow sip of his tea, his movements deliberate, unhurried. "I understand what kind of men they are," he replied, his eyes briefly flicking to the scar on his face. "I understand them better than you think." He set his mug down with a soft click. "The land is not a price. It is a responsibility. And it is not yours to give." Alara felt a flush of indignant anger rise, a familiar defense mechanism from her old life. "Of course it's mine. It's all mine now." He looked at her then, a deep, penetrating gaze that saw past the frightened widow, past the billionaire's wife, and into the core of her. "Was it his?" he asked softly. "Did he create the rivers? Did he raise the mountains? Or did he just sign a paper that said he owned them?" The question hung in the air, dismantling the very foundation of the world she knew. She had no answer. He leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the small space. "I'll keep you safe tonight," he said. "Not for your land, not for your money, but you will owe me a debt. Not a deed, but a promise." Alara was silenced. Her mind, accustomed to transactions and leverage, could not process this. Promise? What could this man possibly want from her? "What promise?" she whispered. He held her gaze, his expression impossibly earnest, impossibly serious. "I want your word," he said, his voice resonating with a strange, ancient authority. "That if you walk away from this, if you survive the night and keep your fortune, you will not become another Richard Vance. I want your promise that you will use what he left you to rebuild what men like him and Marcus Thorne have broken. I want you to look at the people they crushed on their way to the top and offer them a hand, not a bill. That is my price." Alara stared at him, utterly speechless. He wasn't asking for a piece of her wealth. He was asking for a piece of her soul. He was asking her to confront the ugly legacy she had inherited, a legacy she had tried her entire life to ignore. In his simple, impossible request, he was offering her not just safety for a night, but a path to a redemption she never knew she needed. The weight of his words, of his profound moral clarity, settled over her, and for the first time since her husband's death, she felt the true, terrifying, and liberating scale of her new life. The storm outside mirrored the tempest in Alara's soul. For the rest of the night, the cabin became a confessional, the flickering firelight its only witness. The man, whose name she learned was Silas, did not press her. He simply sat, his presence a quiet, grounding force, and allowed the silence to draw the truth from her. Hesitantly at first, then with a torrent of pent-up honesty, Alara spoke of her life. She spoke of the loneliness of her gilded cage, of the quiet compromises she made every day, convincing herself that Richard's ruthlessness was just the nature of business. She admitted that she knew about the families he'd ruined, the small businesses he'd suffocated, the communities he'd bled dry to fund their opulent lifestyle. "I was a beautiful decoration," she confessed, her voice thick with self-loathing. a testament to his success. I wore the jewels he bought with other people's tears, and I told myself I was powerless to stop it. Silas listened without judgment. When she was done, her story hanging in the air between them like smoke, he finally shared his own. He spoke of a time before the cabin, before the quiet solitude. He had been a young man, strong and directionless, and he had gone to work for a man much like Richard Vance, a land baron who saw people as obstacles on a map. Silas had been his enforcer. My job, he said, his eyes distant, was to convince people to leave the land their families had worked for generations. I was good at it. I was big. I was intimidating, and I believed the lies I was told about progress and opportunity. He paused, his hand unconsciously tracing the scar on his face. One day we were sent to evict a family, a farmer, his wife, 2 small children. Their crops had failed for 2 seasons, and they were behind on a loan my boss had given them at an impossible rate. I went to the door, ready to deliver the threat. The farmer's wife opened it. She didn't cry or scream. She just looked at me with these tired, defeated eyes, and she offered me a glass of water. It was all they had. His voice grew quiet, heavy with the memory. In that moment, I saw it all for what it was. It wasn't business. It was theft, plain and simple. I turned around and walked away. My boss's other men didn't like that. This, he said, touching the scar, was their parting gift. I came here to forget, but you never really forget. You just learn to live with the ghosts. Alara looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time. He wasn't just a stoic protector. He was a man who had stood at the same moral crossroads she was now facing and had chosen the harder path. He was living a life of penance, while she had been living a life of willful ignorance. A profound connection bloomed in the space between them, a bond forged not of attraction, but of shared wounds and the dawning of a common purpose. She finally understood his price. He wasn't asking for a promise for his own benefit. He was asking her to make the choice he had made, to turn away from the path of destruction and begin the long, difficult work of healing. He was offering her a chance to quiet her own ghosts. As the hours passed, the cabin transformed from a simple refuge into a crucible. Alara felt the artifice of her old self being burned away by the raw honesty of their conversation. Silas showed her a different kind of wealth, not in assets but in integrity. He spoke of the rhythms of the forest, the resilience of the land, the importance of community, a word that had been utterly alien to her. He moved about the cabin with a quiet purpose, stoking the fire, checking the windows, his calm a stark contrast to the violence of the storm. He wasn't just hiding from the world. He was stewarding his small corner of it. He was a guardian. Alara, watching him, felt a sense of peace settle over her for the first time in a decade. The fear for her life was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now accompanied by a new, unfamiliar resolve. She had made a silent vow, not just to Silas, but to herself. She would honor his price. She would not let this second chance at life be a continuation of the first. As the first hints of gray began to soften the edges of the night, the storm finally exhausted itself. The wind died down to a whisper, and the relentless drumming of rain on the roof ceased. An eerie, profound silence descended. It was the calm before the true storm. Silas stood by the window, looking out at the washed-out landscape. "They'll come at dawn," he said, his voice low. "They'll think the storm covered their approach." He turned to her, his face grim but resolute. "You can hide in the root cellar. It's safe. They won't find you." Alara stood up, the wool blanket falling from her shoulders. She looked at this man who had asked for nothing and offered her everything. She thought of the promise she had made. Hiding was the old Alara's way. "No," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm done hiding." A flicker of something, respect, perhaps even admiration, crossed Silas's face. He gave a single, sharp nod. "All right then," he said. "Let's greet the morning." Just as the sun crested the horizon, painting the bruised clouds in hues of orange and gold, they appeared. 3 sleek, black SUVs, utterly alien in the pristine wilderness, crawling up the muddy track toward the cabin like predatory insects. They came to a stop, their engines cutting out, plunging the morning back into a tense silence. Doors opened, and 4 men emerged, all dressed in dark, expensive suits that were already being sullied by the mud. The last to emerge was Marcus Thorne. He was exactly as Alara remembered him. Impeccably dressed, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, a cruel, self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He moved with an air of absolute ownership, as if the entire forest belonged to him. Silas and Alara stood on the cabin's small porch. Silas was motionless, a pillar of granite, his hands loose at his sides. Alara stood beside him, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her spine was straight, her chin held high. She would not let Thorne see her fear. "Alara, my dear," Thorne called out, his voice smooth and condescending. "This little game of hide-and-seek is over. Did you really think you could run from me? From your responsibilities?" He gestured dismissively at Silas. "And who is this? Your new rustic protector? You can't afford him, darling. I, on the other hand, own everything." "I am not your property, Marcus," Alara replied, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "And neither is Richard's company. It was built on lies and broken lives, and I am going to dismantle it, piece by piece." Thorne laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You have no idea what you're talking about, you foolish woman. That empire is a legacy. It's power, and it belongs to me. Now, step aside from that lumberjack and come here." Silas took a half step forward, placing himself slightly in front of Alara. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, but it carried the weight of the mountains behind him. "She's not going anywhere," Thorne's smirk faltered. He looked Silas up and down, his eyes filled with contempt. "I know who you are," Thorne sneered. "Silas Blackwood, the enforcer who lost his nerve. I heard you crawled up here to die. Richard always said you were a coward at heart." "Richard was wrong about a lot of things," Silas said evenly. Thorne's face hardened into a mask of rage. "I gave you a chance, Alara. Men, bring her to me, and teach this relic a lesson in modern business." 2 of the suited men started forward, their intentions clear. Alara's breath caught in her throat. Silas didn't tense, didn't even seem to breathe. He just watched them come. But just as the men reached the foot of the porch steps, another sound broke the morning quiet. It was the crunch of tires on gravel, the rumble of an old but powerful engine. A dusty, mud-splattered pickup truck came into view, followed by another and another. They pulled up behind Thorne's SUVs, effectively blocking them in. From the trucks emerged not gunmen, but farmers in worn denim, ranchers with weathered faces, and small-town folk Alara had only ever seen from the tinted windows of her limousine. An old man with kind eyes and a determined jaw stepped forward, a local sheriff's badge pinned to his jacket. Beside him stood a woman whose face Alara recognized from a file she'd once seen on Richard's desk. A family farm foreclosed on to make way for a factory. Thorne stared, his arrogance finally cracking. "What is the meaning of this?" he sputtered. The sheriff tipped his hat toward Silas. "Silas called me last night, said there might be some trouble up here. Looks like he was right." Then he turned his gaze to Thorne. "These folks," he said, gesturing to the assembled crowd, "all have stories to tell, Mr. Thorne. Stories about you and Mr. Vance. Stories I think a judge might be very interested in hearing." Thorne's power was built on isolating his victims, on the belief that money and lawyers could silence any single voice. But he was not facing a single voice. He was facing a chorus. The people stood silently, their presence a powerful testament to the truth of Alara's words. They were not an angry mob. They were a jury. Thorne looked from their stoic faces to Alara's resolute expression, and finally to Silas's unwavering calm. He was beaten, not by force but by community, by the simple, undeniable power of people standing together. "This isn't over," he snarled, a cornered animal spitting its final venom. "My lawyers will bury you all in paper." He scrambled back into his SUV, and his men, looking unnerved by the crowd of silent witnesses, followed suit. They reversed clumsily, turned, and sped away, leaving a trail of mud and impotent fury behind them. The sun was fully risen now, flooding the clearing with brilliant, cleansing light. The air was fresh and clean after the storm. The crowd of people began to murmur, their stern expressions softening into smiles of relief and gratitude. They approached the porch, shaking Silas's hand, nodding respectfully to Alara. She was no longer the billionaire's wife to them. She was the woman who had stood with them. Alara looked at Silas, her heart overflowing with an emotion she couldn't name. He had not just saved her life. He had saved her. He had shown her a path forward. She then looked out past the cabin, to the sweeping vista of the North Ridge, its 500 acres glowing in the morning sun. She finally knew what to do with it. She turned to the families gathered before her. Silas was right, she announced, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the clearing. This land was never mine to give, but it is ours to share. The wealth my husband accumulated will be used to fix what he broke. This land will be the start. It will be a trust, a place for new homes, new farms, for anyone who needs a second chance. We will build it together. A quiet cheer went through the crowd. Silas stood beside her, a rare, small smile touching the corner of his mouth near his scar. They stood there, side by side, no longer two broken people from different worlds, but partners, the foundation of a new, unlikely family, forged in a storm and bound by a single, powerful promise. What is the true value of an inheritance? Is it measured in acres, in dollars, or in the opportunity it provides for redemption? Alara Vance was offered a life of continued, empty luxury, but a stranger in a cabin offered her something far more valuable, a purpose. He didn't want her land. He wanted her to be better. He asked her to transform a legacy of greed into a legacy of hope. And in doing so, he didn't just save her from her enemies. He saved her from herself. We are all faced with choices, though perhaps on a less dramatic scale. Do we take the easy path, the one that benefits only ourselves? Or do we choose the harder road, the one that asks for a piece of our character, a promise to lift others up? What would you have asked for in that cabin? What price would you demand for a night of safety? Would it be for gold or for goodness? Think about the land you possess, your talents, your resources, your voice. Are you holding on to it for yourself, or are you using it to build something that will outlast you? The most powerful legacies are not carved in stone or recorded in bank vaults. They are written in the lives we touch and the hope we inspire. What will your legacy be? Let us know in the comments what promise you would have asked for. And for more stories that challenge the mind and stir the soul, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.